Committee will come to order. This hearing is fully virtual, so we need to address a few housekeeping matters. First, for today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Second, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. Third, you will notice a clock on your screen that will show you how much time is left in the 5-minute clock. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. Fourth, we will be beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time of the hearing is called to order will be recognized in the order of seniority. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Acting Chief Pittman, thank you for joining us this morning. Before we get started talking about your budget needs for fiscal year 2022, I want to say thank you to you and to all the officers and civilians of the Capitol Police who work tirelessly to ensure the safety and security of the members, employees, visitors, and facilities, both here and within our districts. The Capitol Police have a unique role as the only law enforcement agency responsible for protecting the Congress and the U.S. Capitol complex. The Capitol Police is an essential agency of the legislative branch. The men and women of the Capitol Police put their lives on the line each day to ensure Congress can operate efficiently. You do your jobs so that we can do ours. Threats to the members and to the facilities are not new. We saw that on January 6th, and last year, your predecessor, Chief Sun, testified before this subcommittee that said since calendar year 2017, the number of threats the U.S. Capitol Police has investigated has increased by more than 75%. We have already had 3 hearings on the events of January 6th. And while this is the budget hearing, I hope you will address how this increased budget request reflects the Capitol Police's response to the attack on the Capitol and the members of Congress, and how the more resources will positively impact the security planning, policies, and procedures that were lacking on that day. As you know, safety, security, and wellness remain the subcommittee's top priorities. Currently, resources for Capitol Police are almost 10% of the entire legislative branch budget, totaling $515 million. For fiscal year 2022, the department has requested $619.2 million, which is a 20% increase or $103.7 million over the fiscal year 2021 enacted total. I think January 6th made clear that increases are needed, but we need to understand what the increases will be and what they will be used to accomplish. We need to understand the plan for this year and the next year and how the increases provided will be regularized. I hope you can address how the request will impact command, control, and communication. You are seeking a 91% increase in screening technologies, a 131% increase in security systems, a 43% increase in training services. I hope you can explain to the members of the committee the rationale for these increases. I look forward to your testimony today, and at this point, I would like to yield to the ranking member, my friend and colleague from Washington State, a state that has more glaciers than the other 47 contiguous states combined. Jamie Herrera Butler, for any opening comments you would like to make.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. And now I'm going to have something for you in the next hearing. You just give me a minute.
Okay.
Acting Chief Pittman, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to your first actual regular budget appropriations hearing. The Capitol Police Force and your fiscal request this year for fiscal year 2022 is, as the chairman noted, 20.96% increase over the FY21 enacted level. The U.S. Capitol Police's mission to protect the Congress, its members, its visitors, employees, and the facilities, it's just crucial. And you do it so that we can fulfill our constitutional role and our legislative responsibilities. And we're really grateful to you and to the force for being willing to do that, especially, I think, more than ever now. As you know, the Capitol Police's core mission is now really front and center. Your success and the success of those that you command means that Congress can conduct our business in an open and secure and accessible manner. As we discussed last week, January 6th should serve as a wake-up call that the Capitol Police must make major changes in the leadership, organizations, and operations to refocus the mission. Intelligence gathering practices, I believe, need to improve. Lines of communication between Capitol Police and other law enforcement agencies needs to be strengthened. Training programs must adjust to prepare officers for the new threats that they face, and officer wellness programs must adapt to the increased stress on rank and file members. And at some point, hopefully soon, the fence surrounding the Capitol complex will come down and the National Guardsmen will return home. And over the coming months, the reviews by U.S. Capitol Police Inspector General, third parties, congressional oversight committees will provide recommendations to improve the U.S. Capitol Police operations. But it's up to you and to your leadership to start preparing now, to strengthen your operations so that your officers feel like the changes that need to be made are being made, and they feel supported and strengthened and empowered to do their jobs. I want to make sure that they're adequately prepared to protect the Capitol as we move forward. I greatly appreciate the sacrifices of the men and women of the Capitol Police Force that they make to keep us safe. I look forward to hearing a detailed testimony on how you plan to accomplish your mission this year. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chief Pittman, at the beginning of your testimony, please introduce any colleagues who will be joining you for the presentation today. Without objection, your written testimony will be made part of the record. Chief, please summarize your statement for the members of the committee, and once you finish your statement, we will move to the question and answer period. Thanks again, Chief Pittman, and the floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Herrera Butler, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the U.S. Capitol Police budget request for fiscal year 22. The department greatly appreciates the subcommittee's continued support, as well as Congress providing the resources needed to support our mission. Joining me today is the department's executive team, Acting Assistant Chief Sean Gallagher, Chief Administrative Officer Richard Braddock, and General Counsel Thomas Tobias, as well as members of the USCP Executive Management Team. As you said, USCP has a unique role in policing. We are the only law enforcement agency responsible for protecting Congress and the U.S. Capitol. We detect, investigate, and prevent threats made against Congress and Washington, D.C. and around the nation. The department's personnel are resilient, highly trained in specialized fields, and deeply committed to our critical mission. Our mission, however, has become more difficult. In the first 2 months of 2021, there has been over a 93% increase in the threats to members compared to the same period last year. And from 2017 to 2020, there has been over a 118% increase in the total threats and directions of interest, with overwhelmingly majority of those suspects residing outside of Washington, D.C. On the Capitol complex, the level and complexity of those threats to the Capitol are increasing as well. This was abundantly clear on January 6th, when insurrectionists tried to stop Congress from certifying the 2020 Electoral College. But due to the heroic actions of USCP officers with the assistance of MPD, the National Guard, and many other law enforcement partners, the violent rioters were prevented from accomplishing their goal. We do realize that the possibility of a similar incident occurring in the current environment is a very clear and present danger. The events of January 6 demonstrate that USCP must quickly assess and adjust to successfully carry out our mission, and this will require a significant investment in staffing, training, tools, and information gathering resources needed to meet the ever-changing security challenges, including the threat of domestic terrorism. USCP employees are our greatest assets. Therefore, our budget request focuses on our employees and on meeting mandatory salary requirements, overtime for critical training, and securing capabilities within the general expenses to increase resources available to our personnel. Salaries and general expenses combined for the FY22 annual budget request is $619.22 million, which is an increase of 20.96% over the FY21 enacted levels. The FY22 salary budget request includes the budgetary authority and resources to fund 2,112 sworn and 453 civilians. This includes funding for 212 new sworn officers for mission critical requirements such as a quick standby force, threat assessments agents, and dignitary protection agents. The main drivers of these costs are for the mandatory increases in benefit rates that were not reflected in the FY21 enacted levels, as well as overtime, COLA adjustments, and within grade increases. USCP is also requesting $2.5 million for its student loan repayment program. This is a critical component for employee recruitment and retention. The fiscal year 2022 general expenses portion of this budget request places an emphasis on providing mandatory and specialized training, investing in tools, equipment, technology, as well as wellness initiatives we need to maintain our workforce at the highest levels of readiness. It also includes such protective items such as travel, support, hiring, outfitting, and training new sworn personnel, making sure that they have security equipment, providing uniforms, weapons, in addition to our wellness programs. Again, I want to reiterate that our officers who are on the job 24 hours a day, 365 days a year are our greatest asset in helping preventing and responding to threats. The 1998 shooting and the 9/11 and anthrax attacks have all been historic, pivotal moments that have forced the department to evolve rapidly. January 6th will no doubt be another pivotal moment in time in history. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our 22 fiscal budget requests, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you, Chief Pittman. I got a couple questions out of the gate here. What is the current security posture of the Capitol?
Thank you, Chairman Ryan. The current security posture for the Capitol is enhanced. We are working with our law enforcement partners as well as the National Guard to provide a robust security posture around the campus. Of course, that security posture is layered. We have an outer perimeter as well as an inner perimeter. We have CDU units on standby, and we work with the National Guard to practice training and drills so that we can address any of the known threats to the security environment and address any gaps that we know that still have not been addressed on the campus.
And one of the questions we had in the last hearing was the distinguishing really what a credible threat is. And this is all in the, of course, all in the context of the budget. And you know, the request for more officers and all the rest. How do you distinguish? We're hearing all of this stuff about March 4th and all of that. How do you distinguish between chatter that's on the internet and an actual threat?
Absolutely. So we know that intelligence is more than just what we see and hear on the internet. We have intelligence directors as well as analysts within the department that are required to look at all of the information that we see on the internet from open sources. We routinely meet with our law enforcement partners to ascertain what is credible, what is actionable versus what is just chatter and noise out in the community. We use that information that we obtain from working with our law enforcement partners. We gather information from infusion centers in the National Capital Region, as well as from across the country. We take that information and our analysts are then required to sift through the noise and provide us with a actionable assessment. How should we posture ourselves on the campus? What of these, the internet chatter is actually credible? What intents do the group have? And can they act on this nefarious intentions to do harm to you all, to the members of the congressional community? We use all of that information to combine what we call a special assessment. That special assessment is then shared with the members of the department. We share it internally. We share it with those who have a need to know externally. And we've routinely updated. One of the questions in the previous briefs was, how do we communicate that? We know that it's important not to only communicate that intelligence information up the chain of command to you all, the oversight committees, as well as the Capitol Police Board, but how can those intelligence directors, analysts, and assessors create a product that is valuable to our officers that are the rank and file standing on post? So we've increased those communications, making sure that they get that valuable, credible intelligence information as well.
Yeah, that clearly that was, you know, needs to be improved
Yes.
from the 6th, as you know. How many analysts do you have reviewing the intelligence?
Thank you for that question. And if I could just put a little context on it versus just giving you a number, I'd like to do so. So prior to me coming on as the acting chief, I did serve as the assistant chief for protection and intelligence operation. When I went there, I immediately assessed the staffing for intelligence. Within a matter of months, I put out a vacancy and I brought on a new intelligence director. His name is Jack Donahue, and Jack has over 30 years of experience in the intelligence community. I also brought on a assistant director from the Department of Homeland Security to provide a federal lens. And Jack did a strategic assessment of U.S. Capitol Police's intelligence capabilities. We have currently 13 members on staff that provide those analyst capabilities. They do our assessments. They work with our law enforcement partners. We knew it was important prior to this FY22 budget. Even in FY21, I'd only been there a year. When Jack provided that strategic assessment, one of the first things we've realized is that staffing has to increase. Some of the numbers that you reported regarding the threats to our members of Congress have increased over 118%. 90% of that increase is just in the first couple of months of 2021 alone. I've been briefing over a year on these threat increases, so we had to take action on how we're going to deal with those increases. So those numbers are in context. We were making sure that the intelligence director came up with a holistic strategic plan on how we can mitigate those threats to members such as yourself.
Okay, let me ask you one, because I know the committee members here all have a lot of very good questions. Let me just ask two quick ones, if you could give me two quick answers. One, the budget for this year, the increase for analysts, so we have 13 now. What would that number be if we pass this budget as you requested?
That would be an 8-person increase just
Eight-person
for the
increase.
analysts alone. 12 of
Okay.
them would be contractors. Yes, sir. An additional 12 contracting staff.
Okay, so what would the total be? So 13 plus 8 plus 12?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So a total of
Uh,
33.
Okay. Thank you for doing that math for me.
Sir.
Lastly, just real quick. So, let me make a brief comment, and I'm sure we'll get to this throughout the hearing. I know you have 212 new personnel that you want and 47 civilian. To me, that looking at, each shift, right? So there's 3 shifts in a day, usually, right? I
Yes,
know
that's
they've
correct.
been doing 12 and 16s, but you divide each of that by 3, and I don't know what the specific number would be per shift, and how that meets the needs of the current threats that are out there, plus the a lot of these threats are to district offices, so this number won't necessarily, as we look forward into a new reality and we wait for General Honore's recommendations, uh, this number, just at first blush for me, it doesn't seem quite adequate enough. And, uh, again, we've got to go through this with the fine tooth comb, but we'll want to figure out how you got to that number of 212. All right, we'll go with Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few different questions. Um, and it's along the line of recruitment and retention. Your budget justification noted that the challenge that Capitol Police has when finding highly qualified applicants who can meet the rigorous employment suitability standards of the department. In fact, your budget's requesting over $100,000 for recruiting and advertising. Could you explain what some of those, really specifically, what some of those challenges are, and in detail what steps you're taking to recruit and retain qualified officers?
Yes, ma'am. Capitol Police prides itself on recruiting the best officers that we can. We know that we're competing heavily against other law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C. We also know that we have extremely high and rigorous hiring standards, and our suitability standards make sure that we weed out for things like cultural bias, any discriminatory practices of those that we're trying to hire. We make sure that those persons not only undergo a criminal background check, but we thoroughly investigate them uh, and whoever their associations are, frontwards and backwards. We make sure that we do a thorough investigation. We also know that COVID has severely impacted our ability to recruit. Our officers trained down in Fletsey, Georgia. The COVID-19 pandemic severely impacted us because Georgia was forced to close. Where we normally screen for officers, it takes about 18 persons for us to have one good qualified candidate. We also know that we had to double up the number of classes down in Flexi, Georgia. Usually within a year, we just had a couple of classes, but we are now running 5 classes of 24 officers so that we can make up for those differences that we lost due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For some of the more granular details regarding recruiting and hiring practices, Mr. Richard Braddock will be able to provide some more of those details. Richard is well versed. He's been here for over 16 years doing just that. So Mr. Braddock, I'd like to turn to you for some more in regards to hiring. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll make this quick because I know you have other questions, but the main majority of where this money is going is centered around processing more applicants. So we are having to process more polygraphs, medical evaluations, more psychological processes, and then we're also in a virtual environment now, so we're paying to tap in to things like Handshake and other kinds of technology that allows us to recruit. We still have a focus, though, on making sure that we're recruiting females and underrepresented populations, even when we're trying to bring in larger populations of applicants.
How many of your officers right now are, like a percentage, are near retirement, at or near retirement? Like,
So it's a very good question. It's post 9/11. We have about 400 people in the next year that could look at retiring. And that's something we've been working towards.
So just in talking with different officers in and around the Capitol complex, I know there are some who I've known for a while. I've been here for about 10 years. Then was here as a staffer before that. And I've had several of them say that because of the challenges around just the culture and the perceived inadequacies, real, or, you know, I'm sure you guys will have a different opinion, but around the leadership, there are people who have said, you know, I have a few more years, but I'm going to look at retiring because it doesn't feel worth it. And one of the things I think would be helpful in retaining, and that was another part of the question, retaining employees is for, I think, a change in the culture between the leadership and the frontline officers. I think one of the things I wanted to ask is, what efforts are you, Chief Pittman, making to ensure you're more visible and accessible to the folks that you serve? And when I say serve, I mean lead. Same thing in my mind.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you for that question. I take my leadership role seriously. I've come up on this agency. I've been here for the past 20 years. I have a number of friends. Some of them I consider my family. Since being sworn in after January 8th, I've attended all of the roll calls of my officers. I've engaged with them. I've listened to their concerns. I know some of the concerns they have about leadership. I provided a platform for them to express themselves. I also opened up communications with them more robust than we've ever done before. For example, with our K-9 officers, they expressed concern over their safety, having marked vehicles. I immediately implemented that they take those markings off so those officers could feel safe at home. The officers, we knew after January 8th, we had a big mission to accomplish. We were planning for the inauguration. We knew that the officers were working long hours and they were extremely exhausted. We provided over 20,000 nights of hotels for all of our workforce. We also knew that they had limited access to getting food, working around the clock. They worked 365 days, 24 hours a day. With the COVID pandemic, restaurants up on the hill have very limited hours. Myself and the leadership team provided hot meals to all of our staff. Over 90,000 meals were provided. I also ensured that the command staff was getting information that they could relay same day in regards to intelligence. I now host a daily command brief with all ranks, but primarily focusing on the captains, inspectors, and deputy chiefs. In addition to that, I heard from my officers from visiting all of those roll calls, from management by walking around. They still weren't getting the intelligence information. I directed that my director and some of those intel analysts start attending those roll calls to provide those briefs directly to the rank and file. It gave them an opportunity to ask questions about intelligence from the intelligence experts. I also meet regularly with the FOP chairman. I had a meeting last week with the chairman, and I also brought in the intelligence director to provide them updated communications. This leadership team has made sure that we have put in place a number of action items to communicate with our workforce. We know that our workforce is
Let me
our
jump in
great-
really quick.
I'm
Let me
sorry.
jump in really quick because my time is up, but I just wanted to,
Sorry.
one more, just yes or no. So you feel like you have the confidence of most of your officers? I realize you can never make everybody happy. Do you feel like that's an accurate assessment?
I do believe that's an accurate assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will stop taking the time. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera Butler. Now the Chair of the Full Appropriations Committee, Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I just would like to follow up on the personnel and recruiting and the increased numbers. Have you had conversations with General Honore and his team about what the department needs in order to move forward, especially in light of what happened on January 6th?
Yes, ma'am. I've had several conversations with General Honore and his team. We work closely together for them to provide that draft report to the speaker. So every level.
Well, let me just, I know I'm delighted that you're talking with the general, but as the general and where his recommendations, are there any of his recommendations with regard to the officers or the numbers, et cetera, that are reflected in your budget? Has the analysis and the evaluation that the general is making, how is that reflected in your budget?
Yes. So to answer the question directly, when I met with the general, his recommendations directly align with the requests that are in our budget. This FY22 budget focuses on member protection. We want to ensure that we provide our workforce the absolute best so that they can provide you all, the members, the absolute best, not only here in Washington, D.C., but also in those member districts and when you're at home. So those, the budget directly aligns with his
Okay,
recommendations.
I appreciate that a lot, because we know we're going to hear from the General Honore, and this full committee will be looking at what a supplemental request is. So what I want to do is to make sure that we are looking at what we have here, which is the annual budget, obviously, and that what in addition we will meet, and I wanted to see where the trains are going to meet here. Let me then ask you quickly about if you can get to us. I want to know about your training protocol, and if you don't have to lay this all out today, but I would very much like to know what is the who are you working with? How are the officers trained? What does the training curriculum include? What is the length of time for training? All of those questions as to looking at where you are as a highly professional law enforcement team here. So if you could lay that out for the committee, I think it would be enormously helpful. And if you can tell us if there are any changes being made of what happened prior to, is there a new regime, a new protocol for training, what that is, where it's going, and how it's going to be implemented. So that would be enormously helpful to us. And I just have one other, and I don't want to, I want to ask you about are all of the officers able, and do you have within your budget the kinds of mental health services? And I know this is an issue that the chair is very concerned about, the mental health services. Is that part of your budget? Is there a special line item that is dealing with the whatever counseling services are there? And not part of the officers being part of general counseling for everyone else, but specific to Capitol Police and to their families. And attached to that, and maybe I'll leave it this way, Mr. Chairman, I really think we need to know what that protocol is on the mental health services and how is that going to be implemented, and what are the costs and where are they within the budget so that we can address some of the, look, I have talked to a number of officers and their concerns about their own psyche and what's going on for their families. I think this is critically important. So I want to see where it fits in the budget. What's the line item? How is that going to be implemented? And how we move forward with those efforts. And I know about your concern for the officers and so forth, but what we need to do is see in dollars, in cents, and programmatically and implementation, what is going to be done in this direction. And that, coupled with the training and the vetting of officers, we really need to understand and know that protocol so that the officers are safe and we begin to build back the trust both internally and externally about the Capitol Police force. So I want to just say, thank you. If you could get that to us, then we can go from there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take up time, but I yield back.
That's okay. Thank you, Chairwoman DeLaura. Chief Pittman, those are two questions I think every member of this committee would like an answer to, and I'm happy to give you some time to give us at least a snapshot on both the training end and the mental health promotion, mental health services, and how you communicate that and try to reach out to the rank and file members to make sure that they know the opportunities that are available. So take a few minutes and please share that with us.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to address the wellness question. What are we doing? How have we included that in the FY22 budget? And I will turn it over to Mr. Braddock to answer the training question. And I am willing to come over and provide a more in-depth brief so that we're not limited to that 5-minute window. So mind, body, and medicine is something that we know is important after a traumatic experience like what our officers had on January 6th. I have talked to a number of officers and commanders out in the field as well, and I know that they're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. There's no end specific date that those types of disorders, that type of trauma is going to end. So we know that we need ongoing care for our workforce. We, along with the congressional leaders, have been able to bring on numerous peer support teams, specialized trauma counselors. Chairman Ryan, I have to thank you for the recommendation that you gave for Dr. Gordon. I know that Mr. Braddock is working with him, and we've developed a program. But if I could even go back to FY21, that's when we first made the request to have a wellness and resiliency director. We recognized the need long before January 6th, but it's been exacerbated because of the events on the 6th. So we have apps. Everybody right now has an Android or an Apple iPhone. The young people, as well as some of our seasoned officers, are able to access apps that address nutrition, apps that address physical fitness, apps that address their finances. We know that policing is a stressful job. It's around the clock. Midnight officers have stress just because they work midnights, in addition to being a law enforcement officer dealing with critical incidents. We also know that their physical well-being directly affects their health. We have our gyms back open following COVID-19 protocols. We know that if our officers address health and nutrition, it helps to reduce diseases like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. And if we can reduce that, we can have a healthier workforce. It drives down the need for preventative care. So we have our officers on staff available to us when needed. Working in a COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenge. I am thankful to the speaker that we have had on-site COVID testing. After the 6th, there were concerns expressed by our officers, and due to the efforts of the speaker and Lieutenant General Honore's task force, we were able to secure COVID-19 vaccinations for all of our staff. By the end of March, 80% of our staff will have taken advantage of those COVID-19 vaccinations. We anticipated about a 30% rejection rate, and right now we're at just about 40%, with some folks changing their mind. But we know that it's important that we address mind, body, and medicine for all of our employees. We have in this FY22 budget budgeted for $900,000 directly related to wellness and resiliency, and we want to bring on 3 additional civilians in addition to what we already had from FY21, so that we can expand those capabilities. We also are working closely with Mr. Brian Weiss of the House Wellness Program to make sure that our efforts aren't redundant. Our employees can go there to get assistance, but we have peer support and counselors on site that USCP is pushing and funding so that they have what they need. We know it's a long road ahead for our staff, and we appreciate the congressional community support. Richard, I'll turn to you for a quick response, if we can, on training.
Yes, sir. So just to mention, we will provide to the committee in writing the training overview protocols and our hiring process, and then answer any questions you have with that. But one of the things we're looking at right now is the need for enhanced refresher training in CDU for supervisors. In addition, we're looking at our recruit training to see what changes or shifts we need to be making there as we're training new officers to come in based on the threats we're seeing. The budget contains additional training for intelligence specialists, for threats and advanced cyber threats, protection intelligence countermeasures, and insider threats. So we've really stopped and took a look at what needed to be added on top of what we're reviewing to enhance our training across the platform.
Mr. Chairman, just for one second, included in that training, it is also on social and emotional determinants, as well as some of the items that you have laid out. I would very, very much like to know what then kind of training is engaged or involved in. Who are the trainers? Are we contracting out for trainers? You don't have to, if we don't have answers now. I really want to see, and I believe that it would be important to the committee to know what the dimensions of the training protocol regime is that you are putting together. And again, the dollar amount attached to that, the various pieces that have to do with the overall, the intelligence, all that, and what are the qualifications for that in terms of your recruitment of people, but the also, as I say, the social and emotional determinants which then go into the mix of your recruitment and your hiring. So thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Richard, do you have anything you want to add, Richard?
Just to say, ma'am, we'll definitely follow up. To do it justice, we want to package it up for you so you can see it holistically.
Okay, great. Chief Pittman, with regard to rank and file members coming to access, whether it's Dr. Gordon's program at the Center for Mind Body Medicine or any of these other opportunities that they may have, can they do that without any fear of being disciplined or labeled or stigmatized as somehow unfit then for service?
Yes, sir. We support our workforce 100%. We know that that specialized trauma counseling and peer support is critical to them being able to do their job. We know that we've had firefighters from the association from New York come down. We have Warriors Rest from Oklahoma City. So we have peer support with folks that are outside of U.S. Capitol Police. I've heard from a number of officers that express concern with going to the employee assistance program. They want to make sure that what the information they're sharing is confidential and will not be shared with the leadership, their supervisors here on the department. So we've made sure that we provided them with outside peer counselors so that they know that they have a level of confidentiality that the leadership doesn't even know or have a personal relationship with those outside folks. So that makes them comfortable, and they are comfortable with the internal peer support program that we're standing up, because they're talking amongst their peers. They know that information won't be shared with their command staff.
Okay. Mr. Amade.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Chief, thanks again for sitting in the fun seat. I get that everything's going forward in terms of how do we go forward and what are the lessons learned and all that other sort of stuff. The one thing that I'm hoping is part of this process is that we are not doing silos. And you say, well, what the heck do you mean by not doing silos? What I mean, Chief, is when you talk about how we need to staff up going forward in terms of operations, I'm hoping that that is with an eye toward what does the campus as it's defined going forward look like in terms of physical security? Because I know the police board and the architect of the Capitol and the other involved folks are all talking about how we go from 4 miles of temporary fencing, which is costing $1.9 million a week, to something that's more permanent and in keeping with the facility and the security requirements, so that when we talk about staffing going forward, it's in terms of the changes that we've made that fit harmoniously and effectively with what we're doing to the Capitol building itself, what we're doing to the campus itself. What piece of that is slowing people down or whatever, traffic patterns, pedestrian patterns, points, video, all that other sort of stuff, so that we're not creating a physical force which really wasn't blended with what we want the capital improvement of what you're protecting looks like. So I know you're not going to accomplish that in whatever time's left for me in this. I'm just going to say that we're going to be reaching out to you after the hearing to sit down, perhaps with you and an AOC person, whatever, and say, as this which is clearly a work in progress right now, develops, that when we talk about what your budget needs are, that they are for a force and an operational posture which matches what the new physical plant's going to look like in terms of individual buildings. Can you give me an idea whether or not that's gone into any of the requests that you've done now, which I assume hasn't, because you don't know what the heck it's going to look like yet?
Yes. So I understand exactly what you mean when you say operating in silos. Does the left hand know what the right hand is doing? We know that there are known threats to the campus. We know that there is some concern with the fencing. We've heard from the congressional community that this is the people's house. It's all about finding that balance between security and then how do we keep the campus open and accessible to the congressional community, as well as all of the millions of visitors that come here to exercise their First Amendment rights. So we know that there's a delicate balance there. And I think that we have done a number of things to include in this FY22 budget to ensure that we are not operating in silos. We are looking at infrastructure. There's a number of technologies that we could leverage. The team has worked closely with Lieutenant General Honore's task force so that they are aware of our needs. We know some of the information hasn't come out. Some of those reports are concluding quickly. But for our own physical security assessment, I directed that immediately after January 8th, so that we were working on our own internal process to say, what are the infrastructure limitations? How can we better communicate with the physical force that we have, the infrastructure, and make sure that it's directly aligned with the staffing requests that we're making. So we
Okay,
have,
and I appreciate that. So we're clear, what I want to talk about offline is that none of my question is related to your response after the 6th till now, till a while from now. It's clearly when we get back to whatever the new normal is for security on the Capitol campus, are we incorporating the knowledge of the advances we've made in technology, the advances we've made in metal detection, the advances we've made in barriers, all that stuff, so that when we say we want to size you with the appropriate operational assets, not that everything's operations, but you know what I'm saying. So that's the discussion I want to have with you. Is not, I'm not trying to sharpshoot what you're doing now. I'm not even looking at that right now. I'm looking at when we get back to whatever operations are going to be normal a year or 2 years from now, that we have sized our Capitol Police on the ground operations, undercover, canine, patrol, whatever it is, appropriately for the new threat posture improvements that we've made in terms of barriers and all that other sort of stuff. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
yes, and Mr.
Mark.
Chairman, I would just respond by saying I'd love to provide a more in-depth brief, but the short answer to that question is yes, this FY22 budget is laying the foundation to build from now and address how we see the vision going forward for this police agency.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief Pittman, for joining us again and for going over your budget requests. I think most members of this committee would agree that the Capitol Police need additional resources to respond to the events of January 6th, but I'm hoping that you can briefly tell me about tomorrow. And do you have what you need for the security of the Capitol complex tomorrow, March 4th? And what can you share about the threat level?
Yes, thank you for that question. I want to ensure everyone on this call that USCP is working with all of our law enforcement partners in the DC Capital region to make sure that all of the intelligence we have and threats to the campus We are prepared to respond appropriately. We do have some concerning intelligence. That intelligence is law enforcement sensitive, and it wouldn't be prudent of me to share it in a public hearing, a public format, but I would love to come over. I'm available at any time to provide an additional brief to everyone on the call. But we have enhanced our security posture. We've taken immediate steps to let the National Guard as well as our workforce know what to expect tomorrow and going forward. Other than that, I'd be more than happy to come over and provide you a brief.
Thank you for that offer. I'm sure we will take you up on it. I want to talk a little bit about, as we talk about security for the Capitol complex, I want to make sure we have the right balance going forward. Traffic and drug enforcement activities, traffic incidents are 52% of your incident reports involve traffic-related infractions. 14% are drug-related offenders. Do you have the right balance, and do you think we, that this is striking the right balance between these activities and the safety of members, staff, and the Capitol community?
I do believe that we are striking the right balance. We have a patrol mobile response that patrols the grounds that surround the campus. We know that a large number of the staff that work here live around those grounds. They also use the South Capitol Street Metro and Union Station Metro to go back and forth to work. A lot of times when we're patrolling the grounds, that's where that type of activity comes from. But I'd, again, be glad to provide you a more in-depth brief that can be explained in this 5-minute period.
Okay, I'd love to understand the dollar figure on it and what percentage of your budget is going to traffic and drug offenses. I'd love to also follow up on your testimony of last week that the department has seven civil disturbance unit platoons, but enough hard gear to only equip 4 of those platoons. Unlike the DC Metro Police, you do not supply every officer with even the minimum amount of hard gear like hard helmets. It's pretty amazing statistic, given that you are the 12th largest police force in the country. I did not see in your budget proposal a request for funding to purchase additional hard gear. Will you be doing that? Will you be equipping the other 3 CDUs?
Yes, and thank you for the question and an opportunity to provide some additional follow-up and context. Those officers that were on the front lines on January 6th fought with everything they had. We are internally forever grateful for them. They are our heroes. We know that because of them, that electoral vote process was able to continue. We know that we ordered CDU helmets prior to the January 6th incident. They were actually ordered in September of the previous year. So that addition,
Chief Pittman?
yes, those helmets have arrived, and we have already issued.
Any other hard equipment to equip our officers? I think the best way we can honor their incredible bravery is by making sure they have the hard gear they need.
Yes, so over 1,300 of those helmets have arrived. We do have several hundred that are still coming in to be issued out. In addition to that, we have a number of other equipment assets that are reflected in the FY22 budget for our officers. We do want to honor them and make sure that they're in the best position to protect themselves as well as protecting you.
In my final seconds here, there is an Inspector General report. It's one of the primary ways that we ensure federal dollars are being spent appropriately. Your office, U.S. Capitol Police, your office does not make the IG reports available to the public. Do you support the release of
Who is
those? Yes or no?
Is up to the Capitol Police Board. The Capitol Police Board has oversight over USCP, and they determine whether or not we release the recommendations from the Office of the Inspector General.
Thank you, Chief. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Chief, we're going to be reaching out to your staff here immediately to see if we can put together a quick briefing right after this committee. If you have time, we can just find a room and we can all head over there, or whatever the protocols are, or a call, or we'll figure it out. But I'd like to get that done right after the committee hearing, if that's okay.
I'll work with your Chief of Staff to make sure we get that scheduled ASAP.
Great, thank you. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would appreciate that briefing as well. There's some questions that I'd like to ask that maybe this isn't the right setting, but welcome back, Acting Chief Pittman. It's a pleasure to see you again, and thanks for taking so much of your time the last couple of weeks and spending it with us. I've got some questions still about January 6th, Mr. Chairman, but since this is about the appropriation request, I'll try to focus on that particularly. So maybe the follow-up meeting would be good for those questions too. But you know, as appropriators, Chief Pittman, we want to make sure that, and we want to help. We want to make sure you've got all the tools that you need to provide the men and women that serve in the Capitol Police Force so that they can do their job appropriately and safely. And so my questions are in light of that. I want to make sure you understand. It's only been, you know, less than 2 months since January 6th. So that's not you spent a lot of your time responding to a lot of our questions throughout Congress about what happened. And I guess I want to be certain that about the steps that you've taken, the processes that you went through to come up with these numbers that you're asking. I want to make sure we have confidence that we're just not throwing dollars at the problem, that we truly are addressing the tough questions that we need to in order to be better prepared into the future. In my humble opinion, I'm not convinced that January 6th happened because of life cycle replacement issues or because of software maintenance agreements and those kinds of things. I think that there was truly a lack of communication, a breakdown of command, and it seems like a failure to pass along important reports to people in leadership so that decisions could be made. And so, like I said, I want to have the confidence that by providing the dollars to these areas, we are actually helping to solve the problem. And I would like to hear your response to give us the confidence that we are.
Yes, sir. And thank you for the opportunity to provide clarity and context. I hear your concerns about the FY22 budget. Our goal and focus has been to strengthen our intelligence capabilities. Having intelligence in and of itself is not enough. We know that we need to be able to convey and communicate to the workforce internally, as well as to our stakeholders externally, in a way that they understand that those intelligence capabilities, vulnerabilities are being plugged and they're being addressed in a manner so that they drive our operational security posture. One of the things that you asked about in the previous hearing was specifically about that FBI document. And I know that this is a budgetary hearing, but I think it's important that we address how intelligence information is gathered. The USCP has.
Chief, just, I know we have a short amount of time. Tell me then how the budget request addresses that and the breakdown in command. That's what I'm getting at, just so simple, to boil it down.
Yes, so member protection, we know that the threats are through the roof. We asked for 111 dignitary protection officers, dignitary protection agents, because right now we only cover the congressional leadership. When we have things such as the impeachment hearings, we had 9 managers. We have to pull from those 10 leadership details to cover those 9 managers. So if we have other threats that are coming in, we are really dependent upon our law enforcement partners. They do a great job, but these numbers in this FY22 budget give us a chance to address that from within. We know that we're the best at protecting members of Congress.
I appreciate it.
also,
And my time is just about out, but my question is.
Mr. Newhouse.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Newhouse, take
Yes,
your
sir.
time.
Oh,
Take
okay.
your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to, I'm not trying to be a jerk about this. I really want to understand, I think the committee does too, that the dollars that we appropriate actually get to the root of some of the problems that have been identified. And you've talked about some of them, but I think the breakdown in command and communication and leadership was a big contributing factor. And so maybe that can't be reflected in a budget request, but I'm hopeful that it can be. And that's what I want to understand from you this morning.
yes, sir. I understand the community's concerns with the Capitol Police leadership, command and control. I immediately came in after January 8th and addressed a number of those issues. One of the issues that was raised on the previous hearing was, why wasn't more direction given? How come the officers couldn't hear? Why were evacuation routes communicated one way on the House and a different way on the Senate? I've addressed all of those. So I first started by addressing communication out in the field for riots. I ordered an LRAD system for those commanders, deputy chiefs with boots on the ground. It's a communication system on steroids. It makes sure that if you're dealing with large crowds, you can hear, you can give clear and concise direction to your officers, how you want them to form up, where you're going to draw your line in the sand so that we can prevent a January 6th from ever happening again. I directed a review of the command center so that those notification messaging systems that are going out to the community, we make sure that they are clear and concise and timely. I also ordered that those commanders at the Capitol immediately start training with those evacuation routes. We want to make sure that we have the officers that are assigned to those chambers in chambers during a critical incident. Some of the information is law enforcement sensitive, so I can't go into the details of those evacuation routes, but I can assure you within days of me being assigned as the acting chief of police, I made sure that those communications went out to those commanders. I made sure that we filled those intelligence gaps because we acknowledge that they do exist. I acknowledge that there were failures of command and control, but I have put in internal controls immediately after being appointed to this position to address those gaps, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's very, very helpful, and I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your allowing me to go over time. But I think that was a very important point that I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Newhouse. I appreciate it. And let me just add with regard to the details and everything else. I'm not necessarily saying every member of Congress should have a detail, but if you're a governor of a state, you have a security detail. You have security at your home. If you're chair of the Appropriations Committee or the Ways and Means Committee or the Defense Committee, it's much different story. So I think most of us would say we've got to increase that. And it could be threat-based given politics of the moment. And I think that's important. And the information flow, just to reiterate what Mr. Newhouse's question was, we appreciate those reforms. We want to look closer at them because the kind of information we're getting that the FBI was confirming intelligence for the Capitol Police, and that intelligence never made its way up to you in your old position or to Chief Sund, is a breakdown in the information flow that we need that's got to be organic and integrated and then make its way up to the decision maker. So we're going to be looking very, very closely at that. I know we're the appropriation side of this, but if we're going to be jacking up the budget by hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever the number ends up being, we want to make damn sure that the information, the processes, the communication, the command and control, the training, the helmets, the equipment, all of that has got to be tops in the country. This police department needs to be a model for all of immersion training, mental health, wellness, the whole 9 yards. It needs to be a model for all other departments in the country. Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick aside, I cannot let your opening comments on Washington's preeminence with glaciers go uncommented on, because you spoke of it in terms of the contiguous parts of our country. And this risks great division and polarization as between the contiguous and non-contiguous parts of our country. I just want to assure everybody that Hawaii, Guam, the Northern Marianas, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands do not have glaciers. And so what you should have said was Washington is far better than anybody else other than Alaska. I think that sounds better all around.
Well, why don't you invite us to Hawaii and we can talk about it. We'll go into detail.
I'm happy to do that. Okay. I'm just trying to defend Washington. Sorry, Chief Pittman. Very serious topic, but a little levity never hurts. I spoke to you last week about my great concern, which is actually getting to be a deeper concern, that in trying to figure out as to January 6th exactly what happened, why, and what we need to do to prevent it, we are not getting objective, independent assessments. I think we also established last week that as to General Honore, and it's good news that you're in touch with him, his evaluation is more about the physical infrastructure, the physical protection, physical attributes of greater prevention and protection, to include what has gone into your budget request in terms of increasing officers. But as I think Mr. Newhouse was trying to get at, and Mr. Almaday, we are just as concerned, or at least I am just as concerned, about the non-physical human areas that went wrong, whether it be command structure or flow of communication or whatever. And I'm very, very concerned that that is not yet, at least, being subjected to an objective, independent assessment that is not driven by the people that were there on the spot, because I don't think that results in either a good overall assessment or in credibility and confidence in the result. And so last week I asked you who is actually doing that, and you responded in part the Inspector General, by which I think you were referring to as the U.S. Capitol Police Inspector General. But I don't see anything in your budget request that would actually allow the Inspector General to do that job. I mean, you've got, if I understand it correctly, 10 FTEs in the Inspector General, which you're not trying to increase. If I understand correctly, only 1 or 2 of them are actually investigators. And I assume that they have their hands full in investigating kind of individual incidents within the U.S. Capitol Police. And so I just asked you straight out again, how are we going to get that objective independent assessment, and is your budget request adequate for that kind of participation by the Inspector General's office to actually do the job?
Yes, thank you for your question. We welcome all independent assessment and reviews of U.S. Capitol Police. We know that Lieutenant General Honore and a couple of the others that you mentioned are doing an assessment, and I understand that you're saying that's not actually independent. We need to have someone outside of the agency, someone who's not tied to government per se, to come in and do that assessment. So we welcome those reviews because I believe that the proof is going to be data driven. How we build out from FY22 is going to be looking at those independent assessments, taking that information so we can use it to affect change on our policies. We can provide better accommodations for our people, and we will evaluate our processes to make this an opportunity to make things better for the entire department.
Chief,
Yes.
I'm sorry, let me just, because my time is ticking down here. I'm not saying that General Honore is not independent. I'm saying that he is not looking at the totality of the picture, at least as I understand it. I'm talking about the other half of the assessment, which is, what happened, what went wrong, what didn't go wrong, and what needs to be corrected about the non-infrastructure part of this. So in other words, the human actions, the Capitol Board, all of the areas where you could have the best possible infrastructure, the best possible police force, and things may well still have gone wrong. I'm talking about the organization. And so I'm trying to get at, where is that coming from? And are we resourcing that effort? And I ask you very specifically, because your answer last week was, it is coming from the Inspector General. And I don't know whether this Inspector General and this budget request has the resources to do that job. So I'm focused very much on the Inspector General. Is the Inspector General in that business, and do you have the resources in your budget request for that Inspector General's office to take a look independently, which is what Inspector Generals are supposed to be about? So I accept that the Inspector General is a good place to participate in this independent objective assessment, but I asked the question whether they've got what they need to do that.
Yes, sir. So we do provide funding to the Office of the Inspector General for contractors, and that request is in this budget. And I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Braddock. He can provide some more details about the budget itself and the Inspector General. Sure.
Yes, sir. I'll make it brief. They determine their own budget request. That's what's in the book that you see. That came directly from the IG. That said, as a result of the events of the 6th, the department was requested to provide additional contract resources to the IG, which we did. We used some of our no-year reimbursable funds that we get for things like the O'Neill building security. And we moved that over to the IG so they could have the resources they need to do this.
Okay, but that's, excuse me, Mr. Chair, just a quick one, if I could. I don't see that in the budget request itself. I see a level budget request here. So is that in a supplemental? Is that a diversion of existing resources from one function to another that's within the purview of your authority under the current budget, or what?
So, sir, we don't make that decision on what the IG asks for. We're literally a pass-through from the IG to you in our budget book. That said, statute requires that if they have additional needs, that the department is responsible for resourcing that. So anytime they have a surge need that they have that isn't in a budget cycle, we step in with the resources we have and we do divert that to the IG. But any request you see is coming directly from them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief Pittman, for joining us here again today. Like everybody else on this call, I really don't ever want to see anything like January 6th happen here again, but frankly, it really did showcase to the world of vulnerabilities here at the Capitol. And I share some of Mr. Newhouse's concerns that we don't just throw a bunch of money at the problem when the structural changes haven't been implemented, which we're going to need in order to move forward. So I just want to talk a little bit about the intelligence operations that you currently have at Capitol Police. Because Chief, prior to your current role as acting chief, you were the assistant chief of the department's protective and intelligence operations. Is that correct? Sorry, you're still muted, so you might need to unmute. Oh, now I can
One
hear.
moment, ma'am, she's having a technical issue.
Sorry about that. Yes, that is correct.
And in that capacity, you oversaw the Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division, or IICD.
Yes, I did.
So who makes up IICD? You testified earlier that you had 13 intelligence officers and who else is on there?
So we have a number of analysts and we have an intelligence director, the new director that was hired. We also have an assistant deputy director and we have an open source section.
So about how many people total work within IICD for Capitol Police?
About 13 people.
Okay. And are any of them assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force within the FBI?
So not within IICD, but we do have task force agents that are assigned to the FBI in various task force units. So throughout the FBI, but in different units.
So how many of your officers are assigned to the JTTF?
We do have officers assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We have 8 of those officers that are currently assigned.
But none of them is with IICD?
No, they're 2 separate entities.
Okay, so how does intelligence flow from the officers who are on the JTTF to IICD?
So the national JTTF is part of IICD, and that information flows from the national level to those IICD partners.
So you don't have anybody who's a part of the regional JTTF?
Yes, we do have investigation officers. So there are 2 different entities within Capitol Police. One side is investigations and the other side is intelligence. They work within the same bureau.
Okay, so if an investigator were to get intelligence from the JTTF, how would they pass that on to the right channels right now?
So they are responsible for reporting that to their supervisors. U.S. Capitol Police has a chain of command, just like any other law enforcement, but they push it up through the chain of command. The chain of command sergeant gives it to the lieutenant, and it goes to the intelligence director who shares that information with the leadership.
But that didn't happen with this January 5th bulletin that was shared with the JTTF, did it?
So that January 5th bulletin was given to those task force agents that you referenced. They gave it to their sergeant and it stopped at the lieutenant. They did report it to their lieutenant.
Okay, very good. So are you familiar with the U.S. Capitol Police's strategic plan for 21 to 25, which was issued under Chief Sund?
Yes, I am.
And you're aware of strategic goals 3.1 and 3.2, 3.1 being to evaluate the USCP capabilities and maximize the use of information gathering across the department? That sound right?
Yes.
And
I don't
3.2,
have the plan in front of me to know
right.
but
But
yes, it does sound right.
3.2 is to establish processes and implement a department-wide framework for converting information and data into actionable communications for the workforce.
Yes, it sounds
And
right.
the explanatory section for 3.2 says establishes the communication channels that make it possible for information to get quickly to those who need it without unnecessary delay or confusion, right?
Yes.
The goal. So it's safe to say that as of January 6th, the Capitol Police was already aware that you guys had communication issues and shortcomings when it came to acting on information. Would you agree with that?
I would say that there's always room for improvement in the area of communications. That's why we brought on the intelligence director. We realized that there were gaps. Mr. Donahue has come in and developed a strategic plan to help Capitol Police plug those gaps. But department-wide, we're always looking to improve our communications internally as well as externally.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one more quick question?
Yes,
Thank you.
of course.
Is there now a comprehensive plan in place for how information would flow from Capitol Police, from intelligence to Capitol Police decision makers?
Yes, there is. The Director of Intelligence has been given specific direction to communicate with those task force agents, and those task force agents also know to communicate directly with him. We've made sure that it's gone up to a higher level. It won't just stop within that chain of command at the lieutenant level.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see my time has expired, so I will yield back because I know everybody else has a lot of questions as well. Thank you, Chief.
One quick question before we go to Mr. Espaillat. Chief, was there any contact from the FBI? We know the bulletin got over, didn't make its way past the sergeant, which is obviously very frustrating for all of us to hear that. Was there a phone call? I mean, we among discussions among ourselves, we'd say, wouldn't somebody from the FBI call Chief Sund or your counterpart with intelligence, get a call from somebody from the FBI? Did that happen at all?
No, sir. And thank you for the opportunity to clarify. The FBI only sent the email. I know that Director Rave reported out yesterday that that information was shared in a roll call type of setting. But the FBI does have deliberate ways, if they want to communicate information that is classified, if it's sensitive, if it needs to be communicated at a high level. The FBI has the Joint Terrorism Task Force Executive Committee. If the FBI thought that that Norfolk document was the smoking gun that many have alleged that it is not in our assessment, that information would have been communicated directly to high-level executives like Chief Sund from the Joint Terrorism Task Force Executive Committee. And I think that Chief Conti said it best when he was on a briefing hearing. If your house is on fire, you're not going to send an email to someone's child to give a message to the parent that a house is on fire. If that document was the smoking gun that many have alleged it is, and we think it's not, you're going to make sure that you have deliberate communication so that quick actions can be taken and law enforcement would have postured differently. Not just U.S. Capitol Police, but there are a number of law enforcement agencies within D.C. that did not posture differently as well due to that one document. Thank you, sir.
Well, that just to be clear, that document basically affirmed your intelligence as well. And I, for one, believe that the leadership at the Capitol Police Department still should have acted whether they got the FBI or not. It was just another example of, look, this is the intel that's out there. And,
Yes.
and there wasn't you guys didn't push for a vote with the Capitol Police Board. You know, we don't need to get into all that right now because this is, you know, we're doing a hearing on the appropriations request. But that being the case, that they didn't call you is not a pass for the lack of leadership from the Capitol Police, just so we're clear on that. Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief Pittman, for your testimony. Clearly, I think all of us, no matter which side of the aisle we're on, can agree that police officer Eugene Goodman is an American hero. And, you know, he may have saved dozens, if not hundreds of lives. However, my staff and I have had numerous off-the-record conversations with rank and file officers since the insurrection on January 6th. and they have highlighted their concerns and have come out giving us concerns about the lack of preparedness in terms of deficient equipment or the lack of equipment. And seeing the film footage of Officer Goodman steering the racist mob away from the Senate floor, it just jumps at us that he perhaps didn't have all the equipment that he needed to protect himself. I felt that he wasn't protected there. If you had it another way, Chief, what kind of equipment do you think Officer Eugene Goodman should have had on that day on January 6th to be protected from that racist mob?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for acknowledging Officer Eugene Goodman. I've known Eugene Goodman since he came on the department and have talked with him several times. So we thank you for acknowledging his efforts. We appreciate his service. Our department uniforms that our officers wear, you'll see different uniforms when you come in the barricades, for example, the officers have on BDUs because they work outside. If they ride a bike, they wear a bike uniform. Eugene Goodman's uniform for that day was indicative of where he works. Eugene has been a chamber officer for a number of years, so he wasn't assigned to the civil disturbance units that were outside fighting in that riot gear.
But
I also,
Chief, you knew that there was going to be a mob out there. Should have Officer Goodman wore a helmet?
so I think the question is twofold. Officer Goodman is assigned to chambers, and the chambers have very specific requirements that they can wear, whether they're on the chamber floor or outside. But I do agree with you 100% that we have looked at the equipment for our officers that are assigned to CDU. We've already put in this FY22 budget request a number of things that will address those gaps regarding the officers' equipment. So there's helmets. Mhm.
Was he wearing a vest, a bulletproof vest?
I'm sure that Eugene was wearing a vest because all of our officers are required to wear
But
vests.
you're sure, do you know that he was wearing?
I haven't talked to Eugene to ask him that specific question, and I wasn't in the Capitol, but I have no reason to think that he would not have been wearing a vest on that day.
Were there any weapons confiscated from the racist mob?
We made a number of arrests. Us, along with Metropolitan Police Department, arrests were made and weapons were taken.
So if weapons were taken and you knew there was going to be a mob of thousands of racist, bigoted people there that were ready to storm the Capitol, shouldn't Officer Goodman have worn a helmet, a bulletproof vest, and perhaps other equipment to protect his own safety?
Yes.
Irregardless of whether he was in a category that's not a riot responding category.
Yes, I agree. We have ordered helmets for the entire department. And going forward, we know that our officers need additional equipment. So I agree. They do need that equipment, and it's reflected in this budget request.
I just saw him with the nightstick, and I felt that he was overpowered, and he is an American hero. He was smart enough to steer this racist mob away from members, but I felt he was severely exposed. And as such, I believe that you ought to reassess the kind of equipment that Capitol Police, irregardless of what unit they're assigned to, wear on a regular basis, including bulletproof vests, helmets, other kind of protective equipment that can save their lives. I think that he was exposed and felt somewhat, I believe, overpowered by this angry mom. Not that perhaps he could have been in a better position had he wore other equipment, but I think he could have been better protected. Do you agree with that? That he could have been better protected?
I agree that we need to do an overall assessment of our equipment and capabilities. That is reflected currently in this FY22 budget. We know that we want to stop the threat before it ever reaches the building. We want to make sure that January 6th never happens again. We want to make sure that all of those officers that fought so heroically, to include Eugene, but there were many others that are our heroes, have the necessary tools and equipment that they need so that we can prevent an incident like that ever again on the campus.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask one final question. I know my time is up, please.
Sure, take your time.
Yes, thank you. I see the Capitol Police today, when I went down to vote, pretty much with the same gear that they wore that day on January 6th. Are they currently wearing helmets? Have you upgraded their equipment to be better protected in case there is another attack?
Yes, so we've already issued helmets to the majority of our workforce. We have additional helmets that are coming, and we also have ordered additional equipment that will be forthcoming as well. Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, it seems to me that they're still wearing the same equipment that they wore on the 6th. I haven't seen any officers with helmet. I'm not sure if they're wearing bulletproof vests, but I think they should be upgraded. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Chief, we're gonna go over everything that the changes that you have implemented and all of that, but I hope you understand our level of frustration when we're having a conversation right now about the Capitol Police not having some basic level of equipment, and how did we get to that point where it was, with the intelligence reports stop at a sergeant, the equipment wasn't where it needed to be, the training. I mean, this is all very troubling, and I'm glad you're making the changes that you have made since you've been in. But you were also there, in a high-ranking position as well when this was going on. And as you heard from all the questions here, because it's our colleagues come to us and they say, this committee has a responsibility to make sure that you have what you need, and we need to know what you need, and we don't need another, especially with the threats for tomorrow and all the other threats we're getting. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. You know how I feel, but we appreciate you making the reforms that you've made, and again, we want to try to support you to fix these problems, whether they're budgetary or, as Mr. Newhouse brought up, they're about process and structure and information flows and all of that. So anyway, we appreciate your time. We, just for the committee, we have a 12:30 Library of Congress hearing. There are votes at 12:15, so if we can run over and vote and then come back, Ms. Herrera Butler and I will go vote and try to get back here and be here to kick off the 12:30. And then we would like to, Chief, if you could accommodate us at some point this afternoon to make sure we get this brief on March 4th.
Yes, sir. Again, we thank you for your support. We hear all of your concerns, and we're looking forward to leading this agency forward with the request in this FY22 budget. I will reach out this afternoon to schedule that meeting and provide that brief. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Committee is adjourned.